All right, let's go. Number 10. In 1992, a German toxicologist named Svetlana Balabanova, working at the Institute of Forensic Medicine in Ulm, published findings that the archaeological community did not welcome. She had been testing the hair, skin, and bone of 9 Egyptian mummies held in the Munich Museum, individuals who had died between roughly 1000 BCE and 400 CE, for the presence of various organic compounds. The results were immediately contested and remain controversial today. She found cocaine. She found nicotine. She found hashish. All 9 mummies tested positive for at least one substance. Cocaine is derived from the coca plant, native exclusively to South America. Nicotine is derived from tobacco, also a New World plant. Neither should exist in Egyptian tissue from a period roughly 2,000 years before Columbus crossed the Atlantic. But here's where the story becomes genuinely disturbing. Balabanova's lab ran the tests multiple times. She sent samples to other laboratories which confirmed the results. She ruled out contamination as a methodological explanation. Her critics proposed that ancient plants, now extinct, may have contained similar alkaloids, a hypothesis that remains unproven. The mummies still exist, the chemicals are still in the tissue, and nobody has produced a fully satisfying explanation for how substances from a continent supposedly unknown to the ancient Egyptians ended up in the preserved bodies of their dead. What's left is a toxicology report, sitting in peer-reviewed archives, describing the chemical contents of 9 Egyptian mummies, and an explanation gap that has been open for over 30 years with no definitive closure. Number 9. In the late 1970s and 1980s, archaeologists excavating a cemetery at Birka, a major Viking-era trading settlement on an island in Lake Mälaren in Sweden, began cataloging the grave goods found in hundreds of burial sites dating to approximately 750 to 975 CE. Among the textiles recovered from the graves, preserved in the cold, anaerobic conditions of the burial mounds, were fragments of silk. Not crude or degraded silk, high-quality woven silk, some of it bearing intricate patterns consistent with Chinese or Central Asian manufacture. The Silk Road, at this period, ran from China through Central Asia, across the Islamic world, and into European trade networks. That Vikings, through their eastern trade routes via the Volga River system, had access to Silk Road goods is now established. But here's where it gets genuinely interesting. Some of the silk found at Birka contains specific dye compounds and weave structures that researchers have traced not just to Central Asia, but to production centers in Tang Dynasty China itself, a civilization separated from a Swedish island burial ground by the entire width of the Eurasian continent. The specific textiles in the graves weren't generic Eastern goods. They were Chinese luxury products, placed deliberately in the tombs of Viking-era individuals who may never have traveled more than a fraction of the distance between Sweden and China. What's left is a question about what those textiles meant to the people who placed them in the grave, and whether the chains of trade that connected Viking Sweden to Tang China were more direct and sustained than we currently understand. Number 8. In 1922, Howard Carter opened the tomb of Tutankhamun in the Valley of the Kings near Luxor, Egypt, uncovering the most intact royal burial ever discovered. The cataloging process took a decade. Among the thousands of objects, researchers noted a small, ivory-inlaid wooden box containing, among other items, a curved wooden throwing stick. The stick is aerodynamically functional. It is shaped with the specific asymmetric curve that produces lift when thrown horizontally, the profile of a returning boomerang. It was found in the tomb of a pharaoh who died around 1323 BCE. The boomerang, as a throwing weapon and hunting tool, is most extensively associated in the archaeological record with Aboriginal Australian cultures, where examples dating back tens of thousands of years have been found. But here's where the story becomes genuinely unsettling. Curved throwing sticks have been found in other ancient contexts, in Neolithic European sites, in ancient Egyptian hunting depictions. Non-returning versions were used across multiple cultures. Tutankhamun's stick may represent an Egyptian hunting tool rather than an imported artifact. What makes this particular item uncomfortable is not what it definitively proves, but what it refuses to rule out. That a specific technological form associated most strongly with Australia appeared in a sealed royal tomb in Egypt 4,000 years ago, and the question of how it got there doesn't have an agreed answer. What's left is a curved stick in a museum case in Cairo, classified carefully in the inventory as a throwing weapon, sitting next to 3,000 other objects in a tomb that we spent 100 years cataloging and still don't fully understand. Number 7. When archaeologists excavated the ruins of Herculaneum, the city buried alongside Pompeii by the eruption of Vesuvius in 79 CE, they found, preserved in carbonized form in the debris of a high-status house, the remains of a meal. Among the carbonized food remnants, botanists identified fragments of Piper nigrum, black pepper. Black pepper in the 1st century CE was not unusual for wealthy Romans. What makes it significant is its origin. Piper nigrum is native to the Malabar coast of southwest India, modern Kerala. In 79 CE, getting black pepper to a wealthy household in a Roman coastal town required a supply chain spanning the Arabian Sea, the Red Sea, the Egyptian port of Alexandria, the Mediterranean, and finally the Bay of Naples. A chain of commerce connecting Italy directly to southern India, operating efficiently enough that black pepper was a standard luxury ingredient in Roman cooking. But here's where the story becomes genuinely disturbing in its implications for what we assume about ancient trade. The Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, a 1st century Greek navigation manual, describes Roman ships sailing directly to Indian ports to purchase pepper, spices, and textiles. Rome's annual trade deficit with India was documented by Pliny the Elder at 50 million sesterces per year. This wasn't exotic contact. It was sustained, high-volume, institutionalized commerce between Rome and India 2,000 years ago. A trade relationship so developed it would not be formally re-established by European powers until Vasco da Gama reached India in 1498, 14 centuries later. What's left is carbonized pepper. In an excavation report from Herculaneum, the residue of a supply chain that once connected Italy to India and then disappeared from European commercial practice for a millennium and a half. Number 6. In the early 2000s, researchers studying pre-Columbian agricultural patterns in Polynesia identified an anomaly in the botanical record of Easter Island and other Polynesian sites. The presence of Ipomoea batatas, the sweet potato, in deposits predating European contact by centuries. The sweet potato is native to South America. Its cultivation in the Andes is documented archaeologically back to at least 8000 BCE. It has no plausible mechanism for natural dispersal across thousands of kilometers of open Pacific Ocean. And yet it was present in Polynesia centuries before any documented European voyage that could have transferred it. The explanation accepted by the majority of researchers is pre-Columbian contact. That Polynesian navigators, who had already demonstrated the ability to deliberately colonize islands separated by thousands of kilometers of open ocean, made contact with the South American coast and returned with the sweet potato as a cultivated crop. A 2020 genetic study published in Current Biology by a team led by Matahi Solari confirmed this through ancient DNA analysis of pre-contact sweet potato specimens from Polynesia, demonstrating genetic lineages consistent with South American origin, with divergent states placing the transfer between 1000 and 1200 CE. But here's where it gets genuinely chilling. If Polynesian navigators reached South America centuries before Columbus, which the sweet potato evidence now strongly suggests, the question is no longer whether pre-Columbian trans-Pacific contact happened. It's what else was exchanged in the contact that the botanical and genetic record hasn't yet revealed. What's left is a root vegetable, common in supermarkets today, whose presence in medieval Polynesian soil proved that the Pacific Ocean was not the barrier we assumed it was, and that the pre-Columbian world was more connected than the history textbooks of the last 500 years have been willing to fully acknowledge. Number 5. In the 1970s and 1980s, metallurgists reanalyzing bronze artifacts from ancient China, specifically from the Shang Dynasty period, dating to approximately 1600 to 1046 BCE, identified something anomalous in the elemental composition of certain high-quality bronzes. The alloys contained zinc at concentrations suggesting deliberate addition rather than incidental trace contamination. True brass, the intentional copper-zinc alloy, requires the isolation of metallic zinc, which sublimes at 907 degrees Celsius, making it technically difficult to smelt using standard ancient metallurgical techniques. The conventional timeline places the intentional production of metallic zinc and true brass in the West at approximately the 16th century CE, with controlled zinc production developing in India around the 9th century CE. Deliberate zinc alloying in Chinese bronzes from 1600 BCE would predate the accepted timeline by over 1,000 years. But here's where the story becomes genuinely unsettling. The metallurgical analysis of these bronzes has been confirmed and contested by multiple research teams. Some argue the zinc content reflects natural ore composition rather than intentional addition. Others maintain the concentrations are too high and too consistent to be accidental. What makes this disturbing isn't that one side is clearly right. It's that the uncertainty itself implies that either ancient Chinese metallurgists achieved something we didn't think was technologically possible in their era, or we still don't fully understand the range of what ancient smelting technology could produce. What's left is a collection of bronze artifacts in Chinese museum collections, their elemental composition documented in the literature, containing a level of zinc that the accepted history of metallurgy cannot comfortably explain. Number 4. In the Bronze Age cemetery at Olby in Denmark, dating to approximately 1350 BCE, archaeologists found the burial of a young woman who became known as the Olby woman. She was buried with a range of grave goods, including a corded skirt, a comb, and bronze ornaments. She was also buried with a strand of blue glass beads. Glass bead production in Bronze Age Northern Europe was essentially non-existent at this period. When researchers analyzed the composition of the beads using isotopic and elemental analysis, they found a signature consistent with production in Mesopotamia, the region of modern Iraq and Syria, the heartland of early glass manufacture. Similar finds across Bronze Age Scandinavia, blue glass beads in graves from Sweden, Denmark, and Norway, have produced the same result. Glass manufactured somewhere in the ancient Near East, over 4,000 kilometers from where it was buried. But here's where the story becomes genuinely disturbing. This isn't a trade route we have well documented. There is no written record of Bronze Age trade networks connecting Mesopotamia directly to Scandinavia. The beads exist. The chemistry is confirmed. The route that carried them north is almost entirely invisible in the historical record, a supply chain for luxury goods crossing the entire width of Europe in the Bronze Age, leaving almost no written evidence of itself, visible only in the glass beads it deposited in the graves of women buried in Denmark 3,400 years ago. What's left are blue beads in a museum in Copenhagen, their Near Eastern origin confirmed, their journey reconstructed only in outline, sitting in cases alongside the bones of a woman whose access to international trade networks we are still only beginning to understand. Number 3. In the 1990s, researchers studying Peruvian mummies from the pre-Columbian Nazca and Tiwanaku cultures, dated to between approximately 100 CE and 1500 CE, began applying toxicological analysis similar to the methods Balabanova had used on Egyptian mummies. The results produced a finding that was, if anything, more directly disturbing than the Egyptian cocaine. Nicotine. Confirmed at significant concentrations in hair samples from multiple Peruvian mummies spanning over 1,000 years, including specimens dating to periods well before any documented contact with Europeans. Tobacco, of course, is native to the Americas, so its presence in Peruvian mummies is not geographically anomalous. What makes the Peruvian nicotine finding disturbing is a different question entirely. The concentrations found suggest regular, habitual consumption, not ceremonial or occasional use, but the pattern of exposure produced by chronic, daily tobacco use. Over 1,000 years before Columbus arrived with his ships, the populations of pre-Columbian Peru were already dependent on nicotine. But here's where it gets genuinely chilling. The nicotine finding in Peruvian mummies is the control case for the Egyptian finding. It demonstrates that the toxicological methodology works, that nicotine does survive in mummified tissue, that it is detectable and distinguishable from contamination, and that it accurately reflects lifetime consumption patterns. Which means when the same method produces positive nicotine results in Egyptian mummies, from a period 2,000 years before Europeans knew the Americas existed, the methodology cannot be the problem. What's left is a methodological confirmation of one of the most uncomfortable findings in modern archaeology, sitting quietly in toxicological literature, waiting for someone to explain it in a way that doesn't require rewriting the history of transoceanic contact. Number 2. In the 1990s and early 2000s, botanical researchers examining plant remains from pre-Columbian archaeological sites in South America, specifically sites along the Pacific coast of Ecuador and Peru, identified macrobotanical evidence of Musa species. Banana. Banana plants are native to Southeast Asia and the Western Pacific. Their cultivation spread westward to India, the Middle East, and Africa, and arrived in the Americas only after European contact, or so the conventional chronology states. The presence of banana remains in firmly dated pre-Columbian South American sites, if confirmed, requires either a pre-Columbian transoceanic transfer from Asia or Africa to the Americas, or a fundamental error in either the botanical identification or the dating of the deposits. But here's where the story becomes genuinely disturbing. The botanical evidence for pre-Columbian banana in South America remains contested. Some researchers have argued the identifications are ambiguous, that phytoliths from banana can be confused with other plant species. But it doesn't stand alone. Genetic studies of South American banana populations have identified lineages with divergent states preceding European contact. And the sweet potato, which we've already established crossed the Pacific in pre-Columbian times, demonstrates that the mechanism for this kind of transfer existed. Polynesian navigators did reach South America. The question of what they brought with them, and what they took back, is a question that the botanical record is still answering, slowly, specimen by specimen. What's left is a collection of phytoliths in laboratory storage, each one a potential rewrite of the timeline of global contact, in a scientific debate whose conclusion could change what we think we know about the pre-Columbian world. Number 1. Between 1956 and 2001, a series of discoveries of Roman coins in North America accumulated into a pattern that mainstream archaeology has found difficult to either explain or fully dismiss. Roman coins, in some cases confirmed authentic by numismatic analysis, have been reported from contexts in Maine, Illinois, Kentucky, and several sites in eastern Canada, found in soil layers and association contexts that some researchers argue are pre-Columbian. The most discussed case centers on a site in Newfoundland, though individual coin finds have been documented across a geographic range, suggesting either a pattern of ancient deposition or a pattern of modern loss and misidentification. The coins span multiple emperors and centuries, from the Republic period through the late Empire, making a single event explanation less convenient than a pattern of repeated contact. But here's where the full weight of everything on this list comes together, and where it becomes genuinely disturbing. Romans had ships capable of Atlantic crossings. Roman written sources describe a great land beyond the Western Ocean that some classicists have argued refers to a continental landmass. The Phoenicians, whose maritime technology Rome inherited and expanded, are now believed by a growing body of researchers to have reached the Americas, based on linguistic and artifact evidence that remains contested but hasn't been definitively refuted. The cocaine is in the mummies. The nicotine is in the tissue. The sweet potato is confirmed by ancient DNA. The glass beads crossed 4,000 kilometers of Europe before history had words for the root. And now, Roman coins are showing up in North American soil, in a country that, according to the official history, no Roman ever visited. We like to draw the ancient world as a series of isolated boxes. Egypt here, Rome there, China somewhere else, the Americas sealed behind two oceans. Every single item on this list is a crack in one of those boxes. Not a disproof, a crack, an unexplained presence, a finding that sits in a museum or a laboratory or an archive, quietly refusing to be dismissed, refusing to be explained, and refusing to let the history we were taught remain as clean and certain as we were taught it was. The past was messier than we knew, more connected, more traveled. And the evidence for that messiness is not in fringe books. It is in peer-reviewed journals, in museum storage, in the tissue of mummies and the soil of pre-Columbian excavation sites. It has been there for decades. We just keep finding reasons not to look directly at it. If you want to see more videos like this, click the video on screen now and make sure to subscribe.